Naomi, thank you so much, and thank you to Will for all the work that's gone into organizing us over the last few days. These events are always so much work to put together, and it's really very much appreciated. One of the things that I appreciate about the Open School, and I've always appreciated this since being lucky enough to attend them at McGill, is the support for sort of ongoing or emerging work that's in progress, and I'm especially grateful to that today as I share work that's like at whatever stage becomes before something can be said to be emerging or in progress, like very early thinking about this sort of these types of social relations. Basically, what I'm trying to start doing here is extending a branch of thinking about how our knowledge of public health issues are mediated by mass digital systems. So this work, for me, dates back to 2017 when I was doing a doctoral dissertation that was rooted in the work of the Canadian Coalition to Reform HIV Criminalization that Alex and I are a part of. And what I was trying to do is to figure out how mass media messages about HIV criminalization are produced, knowing that they are highly discriminatory, disproportionately cover people who face charges who are migrants, who are racialized, and trying to figure out like what is the sequence that goes into producing that type of article, and then how do we intervene and try to develop a counter discourse? How do we speak back to that? More recently, I've been in speaking to reporters about how they produce public knowledge about COVID. And as you might imagine, the ways that news happens has changed quite a bit. And basically what I want to start talking about today is how to trace the social organization of a news practice, a type of news work that relies really heavily on AI and machine learning, because I'm very stuck and I'm not quite sure how to conceptualize that social organization, so we can kind of take this on as a collective project today. Basically, what I want to do today are sort of just three things. I want to describe people's work with machine learning technologies as a distinct and complex type of coordination that is maybe unlike other types of coordination we typically look at, and sort of think about ways we might need to approach things a little bit differently. I also want to help position AI as a site that broadens the range of social relations that we can bring into view, to not see it as something that sort of restricts the type of analysis or what we can make visible as institutional ethnographers, but actually positions us to say more about more types of social relations. And I'm going to do that by sort of introducing some segments of interviews with reporters I've spoken with. And really what I want to start to think about today is how do we sort of push past these limits if we sort of stop thinking about, or sort of soften types that we think about, i.e. as asking questions about where are the texts, and instead have us ask questions about like what are people actually doing and how is all this put together, sort of what becomes visible for us. So a really quick note on terminology, and I know this is familiar to a lot of us in the room, so I won't spend too much time here, but basically AI is used in a wide range of contexts to talk about how the deployment of computer infrastructure and programming code to create systems that mimic or augment or displace human agency. So AI applications are diverse. They include things like task automation, algorithmic risk scoring, and different types of robotics. In recent years, programming communities have focused largely on developing machine learning as a form of artificial intelligence. Machine learning emphasizes the training of computer systems to recognize, to sort, to predict outcomes, and to make decisions from analysis of existing data sets that sort of already exist. And then, as we've spoken about over the course of the day, this decision making is then reintegrated into the social world. Of course, these are social practices, but then the results of these are reintegrated into the social world by supporting the decisions around access to critical social services that I know a number of us in this room are working on, predictive analytics, things around recidivism, automatic work scheduling. It's a really wide array of practices. These technologies are also increasingly woven into people's everyday activities. It seems like I'm constantly happening upon articles that are encouraging me to use things like ChatGPT to accomplish a wide array of tasks, everything from composing music to summarizing complex topics. And so I think given the sort of increasing ubiquity and transformative potential of these technologies, it's worth pausing to reflect on the possibilities and challenges that are associated with conducting IE studies of how these types of technologies coordinate work practices. So as institutional ethnographers, we're trained to recognize and describe coordination as it actually happens. And we're especially adept at tracing text-based forms of rule. We know that a close attention to text can help to bridge the local site of people's experiences, their like really embodied activities, with these translocal, more abstract ruling relations. So this remains a central feature of IE for really good reason. It's that these forms of coordination continue to really shape people's everyday activities. We can see how texts coordinate people's local activities with these like broader ruling relations that are hard to see from the sort of bounded space of our everyday lives, by following how a text is passed on or modified or checked or built upon as it travels through these various different work settings. So in short, following Smith's approach to studying text ethnographically makes it possible to show how like the work that one is doing in one local site actually coordinates and is coordinated by work that is happening elsewhere. And I've done this kind of work that is about sort of tracing text. So when I was doing these studies of people's work and how news organizations produce news stories of HIV criminalization, we saw like a sort of text processing interchange of the sort that we're kind of used to looking at, right? Like it follows how reporters rely on a police press release that then a reporter does something with to change it into a news text. It copy and pastes, it takes segments of the press release and makes it newsy. And then that goes to an online editor who posts it online, and then the text is circulated online. So this is sort of like a text processing procedure that we can follow and see how work practices are hooked up. But sort of the question that we're faced with in this instance is sort of what to do when the work that reporters are doing is increasingly carried out in coordination, not with this sort of like foundational text, but with an AI technology, like with a robot, for a less sort of intelligent way of talking about it. So now, when I'm speaking to reporters who are doing work, when they were talking about how they produce news about COVID, they're not saying like, oh, I get a text from somewhere, then I do something with it. Their news work, their editorial decisions are largely based on referring to big data analytics. So a lot of them describe that the first sort of step in their news work is to go to something like Google Trends. This is today like a current look at Google Trends. Seeing what topics are trending online, seeing what sort of keyword structure those articles.
Oh, that was the topics right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Sun?
My like biggest fear, because I sometimes do this exercise, that like in the moment that I do it, like something horrible, like and we all learn about it together in the midst of the presentation, like a meteor is heading towards Earth, and then we all have to sort of deal with it. There's some like Montreal hockey news that I relate to emotionally, like in the moment. But yeah, so like the kind of first step is about sort of seeing what articles are trending online, what the sort of keywords are, and then producing a text that follows that formula, so that then when that text goes online, Google's algorithm will recognize it, and then it'll appear high in the search. So it kind of gets into this loop. So the question that I've been grappling with is sort of what to do with this case where, where news work is not this sort of straightforward practice of modifying or building on source texts and processing them into news text, but about inferring editorial decisions from complex big data analytics and producing news content in coordination with these very opaque search engine algorithms. What's tricky about this for us in particular as institutional ethnographers is that we lose this co-presence of people's embodied activities that are visible with the other type of text processing interchanges where we see a text moving through as a system. So I've struggled to understand how to show coordination when the coordination is not occurring between embodied people and their everyday work, but instead between embodied people and like this kind of robot character. How might we study AI work in ways that preserve what Liza McCoy refers to as the there-ness of coordinated activity, so as to produce fuller accounts of institutional processes and extend the reach of institutional ethnographic research? As I've been grappling with these questions, I've referred back to Liza McCoy's recent chapter in which she encourages us to return to the social ontology of institutional ethnography. And here I think she includes this really important reminder that, as I'll just read this here, that the coordination of people's activities does not require co-presence. What happens in that setting is often connected into these extended chains of action. Texts, symbolic objects, the products of human activity mediate these chains of coordinated action, especially so as human organization and forms of rule-based and distinctive and constantly evolving contemporary nodes of knowledge, for example, big data, have become more complex, more dispersed, digitally circulated, and global in reach. So as the following interview segments that I want to show kind of start to bring into view, if we start to concentrate on questions about what are people doing and how is all this coordinated, as opposed just to like where are the texts, I think we can take steps towards illuminating a broader swath of social relations and start to recognize how these complex, dispersed, and digital modes of knowledge are always coordinating ruling relations. So to start to kind of make this visible, I want to talk about two distinct types of news work that I see as coordinated by these technologies. And the first one is sort of a look at how AI shapes the content of news texts. So consider, for example, my interview with someone named Devika. She works as what's called an audience development editor, which is more and more a really key position within major news organizations. Her news organization happens to be digital only, so it's not an organization that has ever had a print newspaper attached to it. As she describes, her job is largely about thinking about what is going to generate the most traffic, where, when, why, and how. So unlike other reporters that I've spoken with when I was looking at the HIV crim cases, her work is not so much about building on or modifying or processing a source text that arrives at her desk. It's premised on producing a certain kind of text that can bridge the activities of online news readers dispersed around the world with the activities of large tech companies who produce algorithms that rank and assess news texts. And this coordination is accomplished through a practice that's called writing for search engine optimization, or SEO work, which is typically more associated with like digital marketing, but is now a really key component of digital journalism as well. So at the risk of drastically oversimplifying the practice of SEO, in its most basic form for the journalists that I spoke with, it involves monitoring topics and terms that are trending online, like we saw at any given moment, and then writing news texts that are centered on those specific words. The goal being that when one enters those terms into a search engine, the news text will appear high in the search ranking and then be clicked on. Another editor named Jennifer described SEO in the following way. She said, so for SEO, the thing we really want to be focusing on are the who, what, where, and thinking about, what are the main topics, locations, people in the story, and making sure that's up front and center in the headline, so that when someone's searching for the story, if someone is sort of vaguely heard about something and wants to find out more, when they Google the information they vaguely heard about, our story will hopefully come to the fore. So SEO is about coordinating one's work with drastically extended chains of action that are well outside of the news organization that reporters work in. It's about coordinating their work with the online activities of disparate online audiences, the work of software engineers who produce programs that quantify and display this data, corporations that market these programs, technicians who produce algorithms that assess and rank news content. And what became very interesting as I was talking to reporters is that these chains of action are so dispersed and so separate from the sites of reporters' embodied work that it's often almost as if they talk about their news work in ways that try to reassert reassert the same co-presence that we're trained to look for as institutional ethnographers. Like they're trying to make sense of like who is on the other side of this machine. And what's interesting is if we consider the ways that reporters often humanize or anthropomorphize tech platforms as they describe how they coordinate their work with AI technologies. So it's very common to see reporters say things that assert the sort of humanness of these AI things. So one reporter is saying, I make sure that the schema, which is structured data that runs across the site, that it makes sense to Google, that allows the robots to know, okay, this is a news article, this has been updated, this is breaking news. Or in another account, a reporter is talking about the strategy of how a URL link, including that in an article, can score really high in Google's algorithm. So he said, including URL links tells Google that you're a more legitimate news site. It boosts where you appear on the search page if people are Googling those key terms. And also, oh yeah, you can't be overzealous with it. If you do, if you're like including a whole bunch of links, then Google will think you're a bot. And then the article will not appear on Google search. So it's a matter of striking a balance. So if we sort of pause for a moment and consider the sense to which this person's production of, quote, legitimate news is based on convincing a robot that he is not a robot, is like a bit of a downer. Another person spoke about the practice of creating a contextual, beautiful article that Google cannot help but love. And again, this idea of helping Google recognize this as an important page. So sort of one approach to make sense of this way of talking about news work for institutional ethnographers is to try to look for the texts. That we could, for example, treat these algorithmic codes as boss texts that sort of underwrite what Google or the robots are said to know or think or love or recognize, and then in turn shape reporters' work. And while such a project I think could be very worthwhile, it's challenging, and for many reasons that have to do with, I think, often our limited technical knowledge of AI, the sort of black boxing of how these technologies operate, access to proprietary information, and how to mobilize findings in a meaningful way that would actually broaden the scope of anyone's understanding of how these actually occur. Meanwhile, in this instance, if we pay close attention to what reporters are actually doing and the intricate ways that their work is hooked into the relevancies of major private software corporations, we can kind of open up discussions about the private influence of tech companies on public discourse, the commercialization of mainstream news, and the erosion of journalistic independence. In addition to shaping the content of news, during my interviews with a digital news reporter at a major news organization, I learned that AI is now responsible for also formatting digital news, making editorial decisions about what news content goes where within a news publication. One editor explained, so at the moment, 99% of the content you see on our digital pages is automated. The AI places it there. The only slots that are still manually programmed by editors are the top 3 stories on the homepage and the top 3 stories on the business page. Everything else the AI places. And then in describing this work in a little bit more detail, she said, so basically our editors drop a short list of the articles they want in the newspaper, and the AI says, okay, well on page 3, let's see what's gonna fit, considering you've got a photograph attached to this, and you've got this big ad at the bottom, and this article is about a strike at schools, and that article is about a daycare shortage, so they are thematically related. So let's put them on page 3 because it'll fit nicely and it goes together well. So in this segment, we see once again the sort of personification of an AI system through a narration of its rational and intuitive editorial thought process. We can also start to recognize how the AI writes over some of the most foundational aspects of news working that has been the main concern of sociologists since at least the 1950s. Questions that have to do with editorial gatekeeping, how assessments of newsworthiness are carried out, and the discursive construction of news itself. Reporters I spoke with expressed that they too are somewhat confounded by the editorial practices of AI. As one reporter described, they said it before this, in the beginning it was this kind of shiny new tool, and I was thinking like maybe this could give a sense of what people are interested in. But I don't know, it's just not very satisfying being led by an algorithm when really your news sense is the best sort of judgment. If you're wanting to do meaningful work, it's not best just to be led by an algorithm. Another one added, I think that reporters all have a kind of love-hate relationship with the AI. The AI does a lot of the determining where stories are placed online on the homepage. So sometimes we curse AI, like, why is my story gone? It appears and then an hour later it's taken down and something about Brangelina is up there and it makes you furious. Another one sort of spoke about how this erodes editorial accountability, saying, we laugh about if I complain, hey, why did my column disappear? The bosses will say, hey, it's not me, it's the AI, like passing the buck. So these are questions that reporters are bringing forward about their work. Why is my story gone? Why did my column disappear? These are highly relevant to the social ontology of IE, whose purpose is grounded in focusing inquiry that can show how people and their work is put together and how it happens as it actually does. In this instance, the opaque, technical, complex character of AI makes these questions really hard for us to answer. We cannot follow their news text to see where they have gone. The algorithm kind of seemingly eats it. This does not mean that we have nothing to say about how these experiences of work are coordinated as institutional ethnographers, though. As McCoy writes, to speak of people coordinating their doings locally or translocally is most emphatically not to posit a state of comfortable collaboration, smooth functioning, or willing participation in purposes everyone fully understands. So it's such relief when you're stuck like this to realize actually you don't have to fully get it necessarily. In this instance, AI is a springboard for illuminating a form of large-scale coordination that does not operate in reporters' interests. While IE might not show the processing interchanges that explain these specific experiences of erasure, by showing how what reporters are actually doing, how their work is translocally organized by large tech corporations and what they're up against, we can contribute practically useful information about how news work is changing and how news information that we rely on to make sense of the social world gets to our screens. As I said, this is like very much a work in progress that feels pretty sticky at times. But just to conclude, I want to kind of say two things about what it might look like to move forward with this. So first, encouraging IE of these kind of technologies might be supported by establishing closer links between IE and trajectories of scholarship that are tuned to the tremendous social justice implications of AI, machine learning, and automation. Aaron really articulately spoke to some of this scholarship this afternoon. And I think it's really incumbent on institutional ethnographers who are interested in these types of projects to place their work into conversation with scholars who are working at the intersection of critical race studies and science and technology studies, who cut through the sort of tech industry hype that we often see associated with these, to understand how these technologies can reinforce white supremacy and deepen different forms of social inequity. Ruha Benjamin, for example, argues that while automation is not this kind of like sinister story about a sort of racist programmer scheming in the dark on the dark web about how to sort of reproduce this, the potential for these technologies to encode inequity by hiding, speeding up, or deepening discrimination while appearing neutral and benevolent is really important. I think IE offers useful tools that we can leverage to respond to Benjamin's calls for studies of science and technology that attend to ways that forms of marginalization and racial hierarchies are built into the machine and disrupt, in the similar way that Alex just spoke about, ways that sort of noble aims such as health or safety serve as a kind of moral prophylaxis for newfangled forms of classification and control. And one of the ways that we can sort of ground IE or put IE into conversation with these projects is to respond to Benjamin's question about reflecting on sort of who and what are fixed in place, classified, corralled, and coerced in order to make this type of innovation possible in the first place. The second thing that we've been thinking about a lot lately is that studies of automation would be bolstered by studies that investigate how ruling relations cut across different institutions. Eric Mikolovsky and I have recently been thinking a lot about this sort of tendency in a lot of IE work and work that I do certainly to focus on a single institution, that a study about healthcare is about hospitals, a study about education is about schools, but paying attention to how the social relations of education are shaped by public health, how studies of the social service sector are shaped by migration and immigration detention. So thinking about that, and then I think also expanding upon that to think about ways that we need to push for IEs of the private sector as well. That to this point, a lot of IE has been about research in professional practice disciplines, and as we see the really tragic erosion of the public sphere, we kind of, despite all the challenges of that, need to think about ways to make the relations of the private sphere visible as well. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.